Hello. Today I'm going to talk about realism, abstraction, and pattern in two-dimensional art. You'll often hear people talk about abstract or representational paintings and drawings, separating the two categories as somehow removed from each other, but I think the truth is much simpler than that. I think that works occupy a position on a continuum which hangs between faultless representation and pure abstraction, and I think that those two extremes are actually much closer related than most people would think. This is a painting by Finnish artist Akseli Gallen-Kallela. It's called In Marcha in Winter, and it was painted in 1893. It marks, in my opinion, the beginning of Gallen-Kallella's conscious understanding of how close realism and abstraction come to one another. But we'll talk about that later. Let us first consider which qualities, classically, define a work as either realism or abstraction. Realism is perhaps the most easily intuited category to a Western audience, exposed as they are to the 2000 and some year bringing together of static depiction towards pulsating reality as we experience it visually. Since at least the frescoes of ancient Rome, the Western eye has been fascinated with the possibility of its being tricked by the informed use of mark-making. A flat disk of colour, bordered with soft crescents of light and dark, becoming the grape on the vine. Works of realism then aim to convince the viewer that the surface is not itself, but something else. Something full, trispatial and tangible. Look at this, they seem to say, and see what was seen. For our consideration of the abstract extreme, let's turn to one of its most acclaimed practitioners, Jackson Pollock. When asked about his practice, he famously said that he sought expressing his feelings rather than illustrating. This then seems to indicate a deliberate move away from the use of symbols, a turning of the back against any recognizable representation. He has no interest in tricks, or in showing us what he's seen. He wants us to see what was felt. Here's where it starts to get complicated. Neither of these, I would argue, constitute art's natural state. Our earliest visual culture as a species does attempt representation, but only symbolically. Does this retreat from the individual object to the general concept, my hand to a hand shape, this horse to a horse shape? Does this constitute abstraction? I think it doesn't. Through these works, the idea, the symbol of horse or hand is not rejected as in Pollock. They are merely distilled, purified, patternized. And it is this triumvirate, realism, abstraction and pattern, which I believe Akseli Gallen-Kallela must have been pondering when in the same year as his In Marcha in Winter he produced this painting of a black woodpecker. Underneath the careful accuracy of the drawing, we can feel the abstraction shimmering like a lake, pouring through the in-between spaces. But what is most interesting perhaps about this painting is its framing by the heavily patterned border. By choosing to include this folk tradition in his work, Gallen-Kallela seems to acknowledge the balance he's trying to strike between realism and abstraction, between sight and thought, between outer and inner, between the mountain and the wind. But hold on. How does a pattern tell us all that? In his 1932 essay, What is Pattern?, Soitsu Yanagi describes how pattern is a form of intuition. He says that, simply put, intuition is an insight into an object's essential nature. When this nature is recreated by the human mind, the result is a pattern. A pattern is thus not a depiction of an object as it appears in nature. It describes the real nature. The real nature. Now what does that mean? I think what Yanagi's getting at here is a movement away from the depiction of a specific example of a thing. He's explaining that the production of pattern is this instinctive process of distillation of all of our experiences of that thing into a single representation. A pattern shows us what a thing is, what the experience of it is, not just what it looks like. So let's bring that back to Axel's woodpecker. We can see, if we observe the pattern closely, that the subject of the painting within is reconsidered around the outside. Look at these pine cones, these branches, and here the woodpecker, unworriedly coexisting with the other animals within the support of the trees. Why has he done this? To figure it out, we need to know a little bit more about Akseli Gallen-Kallela. In 1893 he's turning 28. He grew up obsessed with image making and abandoned his studies at 16 to pursue an education in painting. This has seen him travel Europe looking for techniques and influences. When he's painting these pictures of his native land, he's just back from Paris, back to his young family and his happy home, and he's falling in love with Finland again. Less than a year later, he would write, "Little Finland must now set about creating a new renaissance, new energy and life, and a new world. It is needed now in this era of misery, weakness, and melancholy decadence." It's my opinion that in the 28-year-old Akseli, we find an artist who is dissatisfied with both realism and abstraction, seeing them for what they are, two sides of the same coin, two ways to depict an individual, singular experience, be it sight or feeling. He wants to talk about more than just himself. He wants to say something bigger. So they struggle against each other in his work, pushing towards something lateral like a mountain range being pushed up by the Earth's unrest. Something which is both abstract and real, and neither all at once. Pattern, he instinctively feels, is how he must speak. How he can talk to you about what Finland feels like. How he would have us believe we can be healed by its promise in the face of Europe's decline in living standards throughout the first half of his century. The work is happy, hopeful, beautiful. It's full of love. And then, in 1895, the world fell apart for Aksel. He's still pushing his ideas forward in Berlin, learning printmaking and deepening his relationship with graphic images, patterns, when news reaches him of his infant daughter's sudden death. He quickly returns to his incomplete house, to his broken wife, perhaps with the idea that he can do something. He's always been full of exuberant creative energy, but I think what he found when he came back home this time changed him. To his credit, he didn't lose that energy, ever. He kept making, kept building, kept fighting for 3 more decades. But if we look at his art, we can see something new in the pictures. The first image he made after his return was a print, a woodcut. It shows a young girl amidst a dark forest. Her face is obscured from us and turned towards a flower blooming out of the black. She'll never look away. At its edge is this poem. On the brink of a black pond, a lovely pale flower grew. In my dream I picked it, yet from that dream I shall not wake. It was the pale flower of death. A print like this has more in common with what might be called craft than what's usually thought of as art. It's uninterested in uniqueness, unconcerned with any one experience of its subject. It's repeatable, it's a pattern. But what it describes is the feeling of loss, the weight of those moments we all face that split our lives into two, the before and the after. I think using pattern well like this, as Akseli would for the rest of his career, lets the image speak in more languages. A Pollock might be compared to a primal scream, raw expression, understandable but somehow unapproachable. A painting of grief, similarly, like a whispered password, can easily seem to exclude an unprepared viewer. Pattern holds a unique place in image making as its most instinctive, intuitive grammar, a language of distilled experience, a kind of experience that resonates through all human life. We all share these things. They wait for us, implacable, like mountains on the horizon. And pattern is how we've always talked about it. The mountain maketh the wind.